Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're tuning in. Thank you for joining us on this important night where we are going to start our communication and of the current collaboration we have done between the sustainability professionals of Saudi Arabia and the Environmental Impacts Academy. I am joined today by the co-founder and the CEO of Environmental Impacts Academy. Paul has an extensive finance and leadership experience from large corporations. A few years ago, he decided basically to do something like what we did in SPSA. So he decided to do something more meaningful with his life and decided to become an impact entrepreneur. And he feels that businesses are the ones that will get us out of the environmental crisis we are in today, and providing LCA education, life cycle impact assessment education in his way to support them on their journey. So in his own words, and I'll give him the mic to say it as well, someone needs to do something, and is that someone as well. So without further ado, my name, of course, those who have joined and not know me, Mohammed Al-Sarf. I'm the founder and president of the Sustainability Professionals of Saudi Arabia. And tonight we are having this honor and pleasure to have Paul with us to give us some background on the Environmental Impact Academy, how can it benefit the Saudi market and the association members. Currently, we're almost at the 20,000 mark membership. So all of our members in Saudi and outside of Saudi will have benefits from this collaboration. Paul, over to you.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. So quickly about myself first. So I'm Paul. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Environmental Impacts Academy. And like you heard, I have a long history in large corporations in finance and business control and those kind of roles. But a few years ago, maybe it was a midlife crisis, I don't know. But I decided that enough of that. I want to do something meaningful with my life, something good for the planet. And I became an impact entrepreneur. It was a longer story than that, but I don't bore you with the details. But I had got the opportunity to be one of the two founders of Environmental Impacts Academy. And our vision is to create handprints, which means positive impacts of what we do on the environment. And the way we do that is that we help companies in their green transition. And how do we do that then is by teaching environmental life cycle assessment. So that's a little bit about who I am and what company we are. The agenda for today will be welcome and introduction, which we just did. Next, I'll give you a presentation or a keynote about life cycle assessment, which I see is an enabler of the green transition. After that, I'll tell a few words about how we can help you get started with doing life cycle assessments. And then at the end, we will have time for questions and answers. So I will not be speaking for a full hour. I will speak for probably less than half an hour, and then we have time for questions from you. So feel free already now to interact in the chat, say hello, tell us where you are from and who you are, and maybe if you want to network, you can share your LinkedIn profile and connect with each other and so on. So and also then later on during the presentation, you can ask questions in the chat. So let's make it active. If you want to connect with myself in LinkedIn, you can scan the QR code on the screen there. And that's one way of doing it. And I'll be happy. I'm easy to find afterwards too. So if you miss it, that's okay. All right. But let's get to the topic of tonight. So the topic of my keynote today is environmental LCA, an enabler of the green transition. And I will start off with a little bit of background to set the scene, like where are we coming from? How am I approaching this? And I also want to make this a little bit interactive now in the beginning. Many of you probably know that according to the Potsdam Institute of Climate and the Stockholm Resilience Center, they have defined 9 planetary boundaries for the safe existence of humanity on this planet. And 6 out of those boundaries have already been crossed. Now, here in Zoom, there is a possibility, I think, to raise a hand, or is there? Actually, I don't find it here now. Anyway, if there's a possibility to raise a hand, you can raise your hand or you can click on like or whatever, if you think that someone should do something. Oh yeah, I can see some people raising their hand. Maybe that was a bit difficult. Of course, I mean, well, that's a rhetoric question. Of course, someone needs to do something. But now, raise your hand again, or react somehow, if you agree with me that businesses are in the driver's seat. Businesses need to be the ones that drive this green transition. I'm taking a risk here. I hope at least someone agrees with me. All right. Well, I at least think that businesses have a central role in the green transition, because businesses are, creative, innovative. They have a lot of influence in our world. Now, for the green transition to happen, for us to become sustainable as humanity, a lot of things need to happen, of course. And for businesses to become sustainable, many things need to happen. And many enablers are needed. But one of those enablers, I believe, is environmental life cycle assessment. And I'll go into why I believe that in just a moment. Before that, we'll take a short look at what life cycle assessment actually is, because not everyone might be familiar with that. So life cycle assessment is a scientific methodology which is standardized by the ISO 14040 and 44 standards. And there are some other standards too. And it's the state-of-the-art methodology for assessing multiple environmental impacts of a system over its entire life cycle. Now, LCA can be done for services or organizations too, but just to make it more tangible, I can talk today about LCA for a product, and I'll use a smartphone as an example. Everybody knows what a smartphone is. So if we look at the life cycle of a smartphone, it begins with, or from an LCA perspective, it begins with raw material extraction. So metals and crude oil, which becomes plastic later on in the process, those are taken out of the ground. For some other products, it could be a crop that's grown, some plant-based raw material or animal-based. But for a smartphone, it's minerals from the ground. Then those are in the manufacturing stage, which is the next step in the life cycle. Those raw materials are formed into a product, and this is of course usually a long value chain of manufacturing. So the iron ore is dug out of the ground, it's processed into steel, and that's processed into sheet metal, and then that's pressed and formed into the shell of the phone, for example, and so on. And many other processes take place to create the phone. Now, after that, there's the distribution, delivery, including retail, which in the case of a smartphone is not so significant from the environmental impacts point of view, because this is relatively small. It's the impacts of moving it from one place to another are quite low. But still, there is some impact of that. For other products, it can be very significant. After distribution, we have the use stage. So when I'm using this phone, I might replace the screen cover a few times, and maybe the silicone protective around it too. That's part of the use stage. The main impact of the use stage is obviously caused by electricity consumption. I mean, I charge this every night. It runs on electricity. That electricity is produced somewhere. It causes some sort of environmental impact depending on how the electricity is produced. Could be greenhouse gas emissions, could be biodiversity impacts, it could be whatever. And then after I have used this phone, hopefully for a long time, and reused and repaired and refurbished, and maybe someone else buys it after me as a second-hand phone, or vice versa. Maybe I bought it as second-hand. So after a long life, eventually the phone reaches its end of life, which means it will be going to waste management or to recycling. And also those processes have environmental impacts. And of course, we would prefer recycling, but that's another story. Now, life cycle assessment, we stay on this slide for a moment still, can be used to assess not only global warming that everyone's talking about all the time, which is, of course, a very serious topic, but the LCA can also be used to assess multiple other environmental impacts of what we do, which includes impacts on biodiversity loss or impacts on ecosystems, water scarcity, which is a very serious issue in the Middle East region, for example, depletion of non-renewable natural resources, and of course, then also direct impacts on human health. And all in all, there's a total of maybe 15 to 20 different environmental impact categories on a more detailed level that can be assessed with a life cycle assessment, depending on the method that's being applied. We don't go into details there. That might be too much for this session. All right. So that's nice. Sounds very solid and scientific, and it is. But so how does this now enable the green transition of businesses then, that this webinar is all about? Well, it benefits the green transition in many ways. So doing a life cycle assessment, it benefits from a company's business point of view, it benefits compliance with the environmental regulation, communication of green claims, backing them up by solid life cycle assessments or environmental product declarations, EPDs. It helps with eco-design, which is one of my favorite topics. So designing environmentally friendly products or business models or solutions. And it also supports decision-making and can be a solid basis even for sustainability strategy of a company. So let's take a look at each of these different areas. We start with compliance, and sorry about the EU logo there. It's I made this slide from an EU point of view, but there are similar regulations in other regions too. And since markets are global, these regulations will affect companies across borders. So there's a ripple effect through global value chains. But for example, in the EU, regulations under the EU Green Deal, they require companies to disclose information of their impacts across their value chain. So not only what's inside their own company, but across the whole value chain. And also, if it's material, then also many other impacts than global warming. And there's no law that says that you have to do life cycle assessment, but there are laws that say that you have to look at these topics. So between the lines, it's quite clear that LCA is what the regulators have had in mind when they wrote these directives and regulations. All right, and also the EU regulations, they group those impact categories under a similar classification as what I just said. So global warming, biodiversity, water, circularity, which is kind of the opposite of natural resource depletion, and pollution in general for certain substances. All right. Now, the next topic then was that LCA supports with or benefits is communicating about your sustainability journey. So LCA can be used to back up your green claims. If you have an environmentally friendly product or solution, or it's less damaging, or it's more friendly than what it used to be, or more friendly than a competitor, then you can prove that with a life cycle assessment, and that's a solid basis for your environmental claims. And this helps you avoid being accused for greenwashing. And it also helps you avoid green hushing, which is if you are doing something good, but you're afraid to say it because what if someone accuses you of greenwashing? So it enables fact-based and transparent communication. Now, in addition to what you get from an LCA, you still have to communicate only what things that are relevant, and you have to be very clear in your communication. And those are things that you need to do despite, regardless of if you based your communication on LCAs or on something else. All right. So those two topics. Then third, and yeah, right. So also related to communication, there's something called environmental product declarations, EPDs, which are a bit more strictly defined LCAs that are used quite a lot in B2B communication about environmental performance of a product. Now, before an LCA is communicated externally, it has to be critically reviewed by a third party, or an EPD, it has to be reviewed by a third party verifier. But yeah, when you learn about LCAs, you learn about these things too. All right. Then my favorite topic, or one of my favorite topics at least, that LCA helps with quite a lot actually, is eco-design, which can be and often is a very important part of the green transition of a company. So like the name suggests, it's about designing environmentally friendly products or solutions. And the first principle to think about in eco-design is dematerializing, which means, do you need to have a product in the first place? Can you offer your product as a service? Like a laundromat, for example. Can you take your laundry to a central place and have it washed there instead of having a wash machine at home, for example? There are many, services that can replace products. And also, like in construction, office buildings, can you rent a product instead of owning it? That's a little bit in the same direction, but not exactly the same thing. All right. But then, after you think about dematerializing, and if you do need the product, which you often do, then by life cycle stage, you can impact in the design stage of a product, design phase of a product. You can impact you can affect its environmental impact in the different life cycle stages. So reducing the amount of raw materials needed, and especially scarce raw materials. So, don't make them out of cobalt or something like that. Can you use some other material instead, for example? Going back to the example of a smartphone. Then in manufacturing, reducing the quantity of material again, removing toxic substances, minimizing or eliminating waste in the manufacturing process. So can you design a product so that it's, it's more efficient to manufacture from a resource point of view, and which manufacturing method can be used for achieving the same result, basically. Then from a distribution point of view, reducing weight and volume is important, especially if there's a need to transport the product over long distances. Packaging can also be significant. Can you reduce packaging waste? That's important. But also then how do you package a product? If it's, let's say, a food product, you have to package it so then it lasts longer and you don't get food loss. And the benefit of packaging is let's say the negative footprint of having a package is smaller than the positive handprint of having the produce last until it's actually consumed. So these kind of weighting can be applied. Then extending the life cycle of a product, so the use stage, making it last as long as possible. That this is about the product, making it durable, easy to repair, easy to service, easy to maintain. But also this can have to do with your business model. So again, going back to product as a service. If you rent out a product, it's in your interest as a producer to make it last as long as possible. So you get more revenue from the same product instead of having to supply a new one and again a new one. And then finally, we have end of life, which is also important. And even here in the design stage, we can very much influence the end of life. So making a product out of materials that are easy to recycle, designing the product so it's easy to disassemble and to separate the materials for recycling purposes, make the products from materials that first of all can be recycled, and so on. And of course here, avoiding toxic materials is of course very good. So all of these life cycle stages can be affected in the design stage, and eco-design is very much built around this. All right. LCA also helps with decision making. So a life cycle assessment can be very complex, and you can make it very detailed, and you can have it critically reviewed and communicate it externally, and it takes several months to do all that. That can happen. But you can also apply life cycle assessment as a methodology for high-level screening LCAs for internal decision-making purposes. So you make a decision about two different alternatives. Do I go left or right? And what's the better one alternative for the environment? And quite often you can do these things like in some hours or days instead of weeks or months. So and sometimes all it takes is a few clicks if you have a ready-made model and you just want to simulate what happens if I do one thing instead of another. So for internal decision making, it can be actually a surprisingly fast and very powerful tool. All right. Then related to decision making, another topic I want to lift up is that of burden shifting. So doing life cycle assessments for decision making purposes, or also other purposes, eco-design, it helps avoid something called burden shifting. And a good example of that is one that's quite familiar to many of us. It's electric vehicles. So driving an electric vehicle will not cause any greenhouse gas emissions that impact global warming during the use stage, because it runs on electricity, and when I drive it, nothing comes out of the exhaust pipe. There is no exhaust pipe. And if the electricity is generated from renewable resources, then there's practically no global warming caused by the use stage. However, there can be massive emissions in the manufacturing stage of an electric vehicle when electric vehicle batteries are manufactured. Because that manufacturing process often uses enormous amounts of energy. And for example, it's quite common still nowadays that these battery manufacturers, they use, for example, coal-powered plants to supply that electricity. And then if we go from the manufacturing stage, one stage earlier in the life cycle of these batteries, the raw material comes from, is metal. These batteries are made from metals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, to some extent the newer ones also iron. But anyway, and mining for metals, it has a devastating impact on local ecosystems. So it's not a global thing. If I have a mine in some place, it only affects in that ecosystems in that area, but those impacts can be enormous. So there are a couple of different burden shifts happening. There is a burden shift from global warming to some extent to biodiversity loss, and there's also more importantly a burden shift from the use stage to the manufacturing and raw material extraction stages. And this is a relatively clear example and simple, but these kind of cases come up when you do a life cycle assessment, and you look. It's very easy then when you've done one to look at the different impact categories. That okay, what's changing? What are the differences between two alternatives? And then you will come across these, which is good to do already early on in the design stage of a product or in early stages of decision making, instead of being surprised later on. All right. One more benefit of doing life cycle assessments then is it can actually be a solid base for your sustainability strategy. So, because to be sustainable in the long run, a business needs to consider people and planet and profit. And LCA can help with the planet part. There is something called social LCA also, which would then support with the people part. I'm not talking about that today. So LCA can help with that, because with LCA methods, you can, first of all, collect facts about where you are. What's your starting point? What are the impacts of your business today? And with the same methodology, identifying the environmental hotspots that you have, you can set clear goals along the way towards your end goal to be, well, ideally nature positive. And then you can also use LCA to follow up against those targets over time. LCA can also be used to assess, if we stay on a strategic level for a while, to assess complete business models. So instead of just selling fashion products, for example, you can sell, you can buy them back from consumers when they don't want them anymore and sell them again and re-commerce. And that's you get more money for the same natural resources, basically. You can even change your customer behavior. There's a case of, a good example is the coffee shop chain Starbucks in the US. They found that their biggest global warming impact came from the milk that customers put in their coffee. Now, Starbucks is not a milk producing company, but they looked at the value chain, and that's where they found a big part of their carbon emissions. So what did they do? They started promoting plant-based alternatives to milk, so oat milk, for example. So changing their customer behavior and becoming more sustainable by doing that. They didn't really in their own operation, they didn't really need to change anything. And then, for example, moving from single-use packaging to reusable packaging, that's a bit complex, actually. There are examples of companies that have tried to do that. There you have to make sure the logistics work to bring the reusable packaging, kind of to make sure that it is actually reused. And that can be a bit complex, but doing an LCA of, taking into account human behavior and making a calculation of how many times does a reused container need to be reused so that it makes sense, that it's less bad than a single-use container. Those things can be done with LCA. So it's quite versatile also from that point of view. So yeah, those were many of the benefits of doing life cycle assessment. So to repeat, it helps with compliance, communicating your green claims, eco-design, decision-making, and event strategy. So, and to put it in other words, LCA can help you create greener products or business models. It can help you prove that, and it can help you communicate that in a transparent and credible way. All right. That was a lot of information. And then the next topic on the agenda is then, okay, how can you get started with all this? It might seem a little bit overwhelming. It might seem that it's very difficult and complex. It is. It's not rocket science, but it's a little bit difficult. Yeah, that's true. So how can you get started with doing life cycle assessment? And how can we support you with that? So at Environmental Impacts Academy, now together with the sustainability professionals of Saudi Arabia, in cooperation, we offer a few different kinds of LCA education. The kind of the easy beginning level education, high level awareness education is called Leaders LCA. The name of that training is Leaders LCA because it's meant for leaders, managers, could be also other people, but people who don't need to start doing life cycle assessments themselves, but who need to understand and who want to understand the terminology, the concepts, the process a little bit and have a grasp of how it works. And also about a little bit more about the benefits it brings that I just talked about. That's called Leaders LCA. It takes a few hours to complete. You can do it anytime. All you need is an internet connection and you can do that. But then our main thing, what we offer, our kind of big, let's say, flagship product, if you want to put it like that, is what we call our hands-on life cycle assessment training. Now that's quite a bit more extensive. It starts with about 50 or 60 hours of LCA education, of LCA studies, academic level LCA studies. You can do that in 2 weeks, which is more or less full-time studies, or you can do it in a more relaxed time scale over 6 weeks, which means about 10 hours of studies per week. And in both cases, the training is followed by an 8-week LCA project, where you do so every participant does a real-life LCA for something that their business needs it for. And this is how we humans learn, is by doing things, as we all know. And this training has been designed by Dr. Gregory Norris. He's a scientist and professor at both Harvard and MIT. He's been working with LCA for 25 years. He's a superstar. And the training we have a textbook, we have some articles, there are practical exercises that we rate for you. There are video lectures where Greg is talking. And then we have live conversations online with the group and the teachers and the professors. We worked with many different businesses, many different companies from different industries. We provide all the needed tools and software and templates that you need during the training. Software we call this Earthster. It's very user-friendly and fast, cloud-based. And yeah, to get started, it's something to think about a little bit more, of course, but you can start with doing the Leaders LCA. then decide, is this something you want to start doing more of? LCA, is that something you want to do in-house in your business? And if it is, then you have a few people trained in the hands-on training program. From a time schedule point of view, our next hands-on training program starts in 3 weeks, and it's a little bit complicated for the Middle East region because it conflicts with the religious holidays. But you can do the Leaders LCA anytime, and then the next hands-on training programs will be that don't conflict with these holidays. They will be starting in September. If you want to know more, if you want to have a meeting with me, you can book a meeting with me. There's a QR code there that you can scan, and it takes you to a meeting booking page, so you can do that if you like. This was the end of my monologue, and now we have time for some questions and answers.
Thank you.
Let's see now. Yeah, maybe you want to say a few words in between, Mohammed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. That was very informative. And I think it's just kind of like an appetizer for the main course, which is actually the LCA leader course and then the hands-on workshop. So I think from this time, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand or write the question in the chat box over here. Just to give you kind of an indication, we will collaborate with Paul and his team, the Environmental Impacts Academy, to formulate the hands-on workshop later this year in September to December. So stay tuned for that announcement. You can participate in that event very shortly. So for the time being, later on, we're going to share some more information on the actual, web course that you can take independently on your own time, and we'll share that information on all of the social media, all of the emails, and those who have registered for this workshop, you will get all of that information. We have a question here. We kind of have a question here. Can you explain about the LCA for construction projects?
Right. Yeah. Very relevant. Thank you for that. I thought I would be fast and share my LinkedIn profile in the chat, but I was a bit slow. All right. So yes, LCA is, how should I put this now? The construction industry, and I think especially in the Nordic countries, but probably it's becoming pretty much a global thing. The construction industry has been a leading sector in life cycle assessment. And you can do a life cycle assessment for an entire building or a bridge or a road or whatever. And the way that is done is you look at the impacts of construction based on the bill of materials, and then you look at the use stage, so energy consumption, maintenance work, and then also end of life. So it's basically the same methodology for buildings. There are some specific requirements though and standards for buildings. So there's standards like LEED and BREEAM and so on, which have some extra additional requirements on top of LCA, or there's LCA embedded in the requirements of those standards. Still about the construction industry, it's very common that I'm not sure about now the Middle East region, but at least our region where I'm from, that companies that want to build something, they ask and they are selecting the vendors of their materials and machinery and all that. They ask for environmental product declarations for the construction materials and the products that they're going to use. So EPDs. And EPDs are very much like LCAs, but they are very much more strictly defined that exactly how they should be done and how they should be reported. And if you don't have an EPD, then you might not be able to participate at all in the tender. I hope that answered the question. It was a long answer.
Yeah, I think that's something definitely needs hours to really go into detail about it, but thank you for that clarification. Okay, there was somebody who raised their hands, but we'll take the next question. Yes, Mr. Abdulrahman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, let's speak. My name is Abdulrahman Al-Sawadi. I'm from Jeddah City, University of Jeddah. I'm civil engineer, and I did my PhD in sustainable infrastructure engineering. I have a question which is related to sustainability more than life cycle assessment. It's a thought, and I need your opinion about it. Who is responsible, or who can lead the sustainable way or sustainable life that we should live? In my opinion, I think the regulation which come from the government around the world should lead the sustainable life or sustainable way that we should live, all of us. I need to hear from you who should or who is responsible about our life to be more sustainable. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think maybe we can probably both answer that, so Dr. Mohammed and myself, but I will start. I start by saying this is not a fact, this is an opinion, and there's a difference between those. But in my opinion is that our political leaders, their primary interest quite often is to stay in power and be political leaders also tomorrow. So they are a bit afraid for that reason to make big changes, because people perceive change as something, difficult and dangerous. And for that purpose, someone needs to push our leaders. There needs to be pressure from outside towards those leaders for change. And that push can come from, the civil society, from individual people who organize and they, express their opinions. But it's very common that large companies, so leaders of large companies and businesses, their voice is louder. So businesses are, we have seen a lot of that in many regions, that businesses are pushing the political leaders to, hey, we need to do something, give me regulation, give me rules that everyone has to follow. So this is one way. And then, of course, when there are those rules, and there's also, consumer demand and requirements from between businesses that, if I have a business, I want to buy only from sustainable and responsible companies, then I have power to influence those suppliers. So I believe that businesses have a strong and central role. They're not the only ones. Certainly not. Everyone has to do their part. But I think businesses have a strong and central role in there.
I totally agree with your point. And, I think it comes back, maybe we can say about the chicken and the egg, who is first to apply the sustainability agenda. And that's something of a big topic. Maybe later on we can have a separate session on it from a regulatory point of view, or from, you mentioned, the companies push for it, which I totally agree. And I think it depends where you come from, which society, which country. Different countries have different kind of social norms that they basically have. We have a couple of hands, and then I'll go back to the chat. Mr. Abdullah.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Mohammed and Mr. Poul. My question is about, because always when I hear green transition, it comes to mind energy transition, because they come from renewables background. I need just to make sure. does the green transition all about renewables or not? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very excellent question, and thanks for asking that. And the answer is no, quite clearly. Renewable energy and the energy transition is very important, and that will need to happen. But that's not the only thing that needs to happen, because regardless of how energy is produced, producing it will have some impacts on the environment. And the biggest driver for the environmental crisis we are in at the moment is just overconsumption. We consume and waste resources just at an insane rate. I think globally, it's about 7% of all natural resources that are being produced, they actually get recycled or they get used again. So the circularity of our global society is around 7%, which is just mind-blowing. So we need to consume less. We need to, there are some things you can do easily. You can stop eating red meat. That would already cut, basically almost solve the climate crisis alone. And then consume less. So when you buy something, keep it for as long as possible. Buy second hand and use products. Don't buy products. Use a service instead, and so on. So moving towards a circular economy is something that will probably happen. We might be forced into it, or we can do it on purpose. But that's so it's much more than only the energy transition. But having said that, the energy transition is super important also. Yeah.
Those are shocking facts, really, to find out that only the 7% basically is kind of like what we're doing after all of these initiatives worldwide. So we still have a lot to do.
Oh yeah.
Okay, we have Jen Saad. You can go ahead.
Hello all. This
Hello.
is Saad from Riyadh. I work in business development in renewable energies and energy efficiency. I have a question in calculating or doing the LCAs on renewables, right? So basically, we hear these new terms, net zero emission, green technologies, and these stuff. But when we dig deep into the production of these systems and in general the renewable energies, we found that like the material contributing to these systems contains heavy machines, manufacturers and factories, right? That consumes a lot of power, that consumes a lot of energy, and that is contributing negatively to the environment. So how can we integrate the overlapping equipment that contribute to the ultimate system, which is this new renewable system? So it is just about the integration. So how can we assess it?
Right. So there was a few statements there, and then how can we assess? So how do we assess the impact of renewable energy compared to non-renewable fossil energy? From a life cycle assessment point of view, and first of all, thank you for the question. Very good question. From a life cycle assessment point of view, it's quite straightforward. I mean, you look at, for simplicity, we could talk about electricity. So you look at the resources needed and the environmental impacts caused by producing, let's say, 1 megawatt hour of electricity. So the megawatt hour in this case is what we in LCA call a functional unit. So it's the purpose for, the reason for being of whatever it is we do for, in this case, the electricity production. So we can compare the environmental impacts of producing 1 megawatt-hour of electricity in different ways. Solar, it can be wind, it can be hydro power, or it can be burning coal or whatever it might be. And all of those, they do have some environmental impacts, but they are different. They are different. The impacts are different, and the magnitude of those impacts is different. But you can capture that with a life cycle assessment. That would be another lecture. We don't have time for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have a few other questions on the chat, so I'll just try to summarize. We have one from, sorry for pronouncing this if I'm right, it's Dr. Abhilash. So he's basically saying that one of the most kind of important aspect is the actual data, the quality of the data. So how can practitioners ensure that they gather reliable data? What strategies can be used to address this?
Okay, thank you. That's also an excellent question. And it shows that you already know something about LCA. In our hands-on LCA training, which takes 10 weeks or 14 weeks, and the LCA project part is 8 weeks, the majority of those 8 weeks that people spend on doing their LCA is used for collecting data. So data is a big issue. And it's always best if you have, first of all, you need to find out a little bit that exactly what data do you need, because you cannot model the whole world. You should also, you can focus on, it's okay to focus on only what's relevant, and you should focus on only what's relevant. And then for what is relevant, you should try to get what we call primary data. So get real, accurate, exact data that is specific to your system that you're looking at, and get that as much as possible. And if that's not available, then you can fall back and look at what we call background databases. So there are databases with environmental data, more and more. So databases such as EcoInvent, for example, they have tens of thousands of processes and materials with LCA data that you can use. And then if that's not available, then you need to search and just Google, look for, maybe there's a scientific article that you can find and use, and so on. So there is always a way, and there's always a solution, well, or almost always, but it's quite often not perfect, and it's not always exactly what you were looking for. But usually you find data that's good enough. And that's a good rule in LCA. Good enough is the new perfect. It's LCA data and environmental data is not as exact as, for example, financial data. If you are 80% correct, that's excellent.
So that's good, because that brings us to the second question related to that from Rose, is basically the tool, the LCA tool. You mentioned something in the hands-on workshop, and you mentioned something that you provide as a platform. So she's mentioning here about, do we have a tool as something to relate to LCA that measures carbon emission like other rating systems?
Yeah, so LCA is quite complex from a technical point of view, so you should always use an LCA software, a solid, proper LCA software. The software that we are using is called Earthster, which is relatively new. They've been around for maybe 5 years. It's cloud-based, it's fast, it's user-friendly and very visual, and you can scale up your LCAs with it and so on. Yeah, to answer the question, there are many different LCA softwares, LCA tools, and I do recommend using one of those. Don't try to do it in Excel or something. You'll make your life miserable, and you waste a few months, and then you end up using a real LCA software anyway. So I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. The market is kind of like have abundance of different softwares that tackle different issues. I think it's difficult, maybe hard to find the right software that covers all of the topics. That's where your association or your academy helps in that issue to identify the right tools, the right measures, the right methods on how to do it and how to become an expert in doing all of this. We have a question here about more of a point of view from Hussein about the greenwashing aspect. I'm cautious of time. We still maybe have 2 minutes. So he's talking about the greenwashing accusations, okay, using this as facts, not claims. So how can LCA help with that?
Right. Yes, thank you very much. That's a good question. We actually had a webinar about that topic like maybe a year or two ago. But anyway, LCA can exactly it does. If you do a life cycle assessment, it does not automatically guarantee that you're not doing greenwashing, but it helps because then at least you have studied and you have facts, and before communicating the results of an LCA, it should be critically reviewed so that you have reviewed facts based on a scientific methodology for whatever you are claiming. So that part is pretty safe. But then the other question is, how do you use that information? So you can still use you can use any information in the wrong way, and you can still do greenwashing if you want to with LCA. And you will get caught for it because people will notice and they will call you out that, hey, why are you saying that? You're using the information in the wrong way. So it can help, but you need to still be cautious of what to communicate and how to communicate it.
Okay, maybe we'll end with this question, which is very important. A couple of participants have asked about this, is how can they start? So basically you said we have the hands-on workshop, which is probably going to be better for the Saudi timetable after September to December. But from now on until that date, how can people start the course, the LCA leader, and so on and so forth? Maybe if you can just give us some pointers on that.
Yeah, well, one answer is contact me. I'm easy to reach. I put in the chat there's a link for booking a meeting with me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So you can do that, and then go to our webpage, environmentalacademy.org. At least until we are also there listed on the SPSA webpage, you will find us there. I'll write that in the chat too.
Yeah, and we will definitely share more in the coming days on our newsletter and social media handles. So please make sure you visit them frequently. And we will be sharing specific codes that you can use to access these courses as part of the SPSA Association. We have a couple of more questions, but we are unfortunately out of time, and we don't want to hold you up more than what we agreed upon. We have a nice question from Asim, another question from Jumana. So I'll share the questions with you later on. Maybe we can share the answers with these participants later on, because I think they're very important. But for this time, I think, thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to our collaboration, and we will share this information to all of our members, and appreciate the initiative. I think it's a very important topic, especially with what's happening in Saudi and its transition to carbon neutral and by 2060, carbon neutrality goal. And, with entities and associations or companies like yours, we will be hopefully in that target, make it as soon as possible. Any last words? Your mic is yours.
Thank you. Is my only last words. Thanks, Dr. Mohammed, for having me, and thanks to all of SPSA. It was an honor, and I'm happy I had the opportunity to talk a bit about LCA. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for all who joined us. Please make sure to follow all of the handles for SPSA, and we'll be connecting with you on email, following up with a survey that you can generate your certificate of attendance later on, inshallah. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening all.